There is a place where mist lingers on mountains, where wooden temples rise quietly among forests, and where rivers carry reflections of lantern light beneath bridges of stone. It is a land of discipline and beauty, of poetry and war, of silence and song. This is medieval Japan, an era of samurai and monks, of shoguns and peasants, of gardens shaped like living paintings and swords forged like prayers in steel. Unlike other histories, this one moves softly. The voices of the past do not shout. Here, they whisper. The temples do not blaze with grandeur. They glow with quiet calm. The warriors do not rush endlessly into battle. They wait. They watch. They carry their duty like shadows. To listen to the story of medieval Japan is to step into a dream where discipline and serenity meet, where beauty and impermanence shape all things. And so, as you rest tonight, let the story unfold slowly. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and walk with me into the silent temples and samurai shadows of Japan long ago. In medieval Japan, the landscape itself was sacred. Mountains, rivers, forests, and stones were not only features of the land, but presences of spirit, living guardians of the world. To climb a peak, to walk a forest path, to kneel before a waterfall, was not merely travel. It was pilgrimage, a journey into the heart of both the earth and the self. In a world ruled by samurai and shoguns, where duty weighed heavily, pilgrimages offered release, renewal, and connection to something greater than power or war. The mountains were at the heart of this practice. Japan is a land of peaks, many of them steep, forested, and crowned with snow. Among them, Mount Fuji stood highest, its cone rising above clouds, visible from far across the land. To look upon it was to see perfection, balance, eternity. Yet Fuji was not alone. Sacred ranges such as the Kumano Mountains and Mount Hai became centers of devotion, their slopes lined with temples, shrines, and paths worn by the feet of countless pilgrims. Imagine a pilgrim at dawn, beginning the climb. His straw sandals crunch softly against the earth, his staff clicks against stone. On his back is a simple pack with rice, a gourd of water, and a bell that rings with each step. Mist curls through the trees, birds call, and the scent of pine fills the air. The climb is steep, his breath heavy, but he does not hurry. Each step is prayer, each pause a moment of reflection. Pilgrimage was not limited to monks or nobles. Farmers, merchants, artisans, all could become pilgrims, leaving behind fields and shops for a season to walk the paths of devotion. Some traveled in groups, singing chants as they climbed, sharing rice balls at resting places. Others walked alone, their silence deeper than any prayer. Along the way, they encountered shrines nestled in forests, waterfalls cascading into pools, rocks bound with sacred ropes, each site a reminder of the divine within nature. One of the most famous journeys was to the Kumano shrines, a network of sacred sites in the southern mountains. Pilgrims walked through forests so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. Rivers cut through valleys, bridges swayed above currents. Moss-covered stones that had felt the weight of countless feet. At each shrine, pilgrims bowed, lit incense, offered coins, and moved onward, their journey a thread woven between earth and spirit. Temples on Mount Hai near Kyoto also drew pilgrims. Monks trained there in ascetic practices, walking long circuits of the mountain paths, chanting sutras, bowing before shrines, and testing their endurance in silence. These practices were not only for strength, but for awakening, reminders that the body and spirit could be disciplined through hardship, that enlightenment could be found in each step of the path. Pilgrimage was also tied to ancestors. Families walked together to honor the spirits of their dead, carrying offerings, lighting lanterns, placing flowers at shrines. The act was both memory and hope, connecting past with present, the living with the departed. A child might climb, holding a parent's hand, whispering prayers for a grandparent now gone, learning that devotion was not only personal but communal, stretching across generations. Imagine evening upon a sacred mountain. The pilgrim sits by a small fire, the stars above shining through thin clouds. Around him, other travelers murmur prayers, their faces lit by flame. The sound of a waterfall echoes nearby, its rhythm steady, eternal. He eats a handful of rice, drinks water from a stream, and then rests, his head upon a bundle of cloth. The air is cool, the ground firm, the journey long. Yet in the silence of the mountain, he feels the presence of the divine. These pilgrimages remind us that the sacred is not always distant. It can be found in the curve of a tree, in the flow of a river, in the silence of a path. They teach that to walk with intention, to breathe with awareness, to climb with humility is itself prayer. In medieval Japan, where temples rose in valleys and castles loomed on hills, the mountains remained eternal, silent teachers of impermanence and endurance. As you drift into rest, imagine walking a forest path beneath towering cedars, your footsteps soft against moss, your breath steady. Imagine lanterns glowing at a shrine, the sound of water flowing over stone, the sight of peaks rising above clouds. The journey is long, the path steep, but each step is prayer, each pause eternity. This is the pilgrimage of medieval Japan, quiet, enduring, sacred. The story of medieval Japan is not one of a single path, but of many threads woven together. Warriors and monks, peasants and poets, merchants and artisans, lords and ladies. It is a story of silence and shadow, of strength and fragility, of impermanence embraced as truth. From the wooden halls of Kyoto to the misty slopes of sacred mountains, from the clang of swords to the whisper of brush upon paper, the land carried a rhythm both steady and fleeting. The samurai stood at the center, their swords polished, their armor lacquered, their discipline shaped by both steel and zen. They lived knowing death could come at any moment. Their honor carried not in victory alone, but in clarity of spirit. Their lives remind us that strength is not defiance of impermanence, but acceptance of it, to live fully even as blossoms fall. Temples and monks offered silence. In their gardens of sand and stone, in their halls of incense and chant, they taught the people to breathe, to pause, to see eternity in a moment of stillness. Zen joined the path of the sword, shaping warriors into seekers of balance, teaching that a strike and a breath are both mirrors of life itself. Villages filled the land with life's quiet endurance. Farmers bent over rice paddies, women carried water, children laughed among fields. Their rituals blended Shinto and Buddhist practices, honoring both the spirits of nature and the memory of ancestors. They lived in the shadow of castles, yet their devotion sustained the whole nation. Their prayers whispered at dawn carried as much weight as the banners of daimyo at war. Artisans shaped the unseen strength of the age. Potters formed bowls whose cracks became beauty. Weavers spun cloth that clothed lords and peasants alike. Carpenters raised temples and castles whose beams seemed to grow from the forest itself. With each vessel, each thread, each beam, they taught the lesson of imperfection, of endurance, of care. Their work was humble, yet eternal. Merchants carried goods and stories along narrow roads, their ox carts creaking, their footsteps steady. They brought salt from the coasts, cloth from looms, oil from presses, and tales from distant provinces. Though ranked low in status, their role was high in importance, binding the land together with threads of trade and memory. Festivals lifted hearts with light and rhythm. Lanterns floated upon rivers during Obon, guiding ancestors home. Cherry blossoms fell upon sake cups in spring, laughter filling gardens. Drums echoed through streets in summer. Children chased fireflies beneath painted lanterns. Even in times of war, people found ways to celebrate, to remember that joy is fleeting and therefore precious. Castles rose across the land, strongholds of ambition and symbols of fragile order. Within their stone walls, lords commanded armies, scribes recorded taxes, women tended gardens, and children played with wooden toys. They were places of both steel and tea, both armor and poetry, embodying the paradox of war and beauty intertwined. Their stones remind us that strength itself is impermanent, destined one day to fall, yet meaningful in its time. The Sengoku period brought chaos, endless battles, shifting alliances. Villages burned, families fled, fields lay scarred. And yet, even then, life endured. Farmers planted again, monks rebuilt temples, Artisans shaped new bowls. Children laughed once more. The philosophy of impermanence, carried deep in the heart of the people, gave them strength, not to resist change, but to flow within it, like rivers finding new paths after storms. Imagine a single night at the end of this age. In a castle chamber, a lord sits in council, maps spread before him, banners fluttering in torchlight. In a village nearby, farmers share rice and miso, their children asleep by the hearth. In a temple, monks chant sutras, their voices low, steady as bells, tolling in the night. And beneath a cherry tree, petals fall silently, drifting into the river that carries them away. Each life, each place, each moment is fleeting, yet together they form the story of a land, the quiet strength of medieval Japan. This final segment is not an ending, but a reflection. For medieval Japan itself did not vanish, it transformed. Its temples still stand, its gardens still whisper, its poetry still speaks, its castles still rise, some in ruin, some in restoration. Its philosophy of impermanence still breathes in the fall of blossoms, in the glow of lanterns, in the silence of a tea bowl. Shadows and silence remain, not as absence, but as presence, gentle reminders of the beauty of the fleeting. Asu. Drift into rest. Imagine walking once more through all these places. A temple garden raked in silence, a village festival lit with lanterns, a castle rising from stone, a samurai bowing in meditation, a farmer planting rice at dawn. Imagine them as shadows and echoes, as blossoms falling upon water. This is medieval Japan, silent, fleeting, eternal. Every age of history is a reminder that nothing lasts forever. Blossoms fall, rivers change their course, castles burn, and dynasties fade. In medieval Japan, this truth was not hidden but embraced, woven deeply into philosophy, art, and daily life. As the Sengoku Wars stretched on, as lords rose and fell, as villages endured both fire and renewal, the people carried with them a quiet understanding that impermanence is not sorrow, but truth. This awareness had long been expressed in the concept of mono no aware, the gentle sadness at the transience of things. A cherry blossom's beauty lies in its briefness. A poem's power rests in its fleeting lines. A tea bowl's crack makes it unique, never to be repeated. The same held true for life itself. Samurai rode into battle knowing death could come at any moment. Peasants planted rice knowing floods might sweep it away. Monks copied sutras knowing their own hands would not endure. The acceptance of impermanence gave life depth, meaning, and calm. Imagine a battlefield after war has passed. The banners are torn, the ground scarred. Yet in the quiet morning, new grass begins to grow. Birds return, water trickles through streams, and villagers step carefully into fields once filled with steel. The scars remain, but life does not end, it transforms. To witness this is to understand impermanence, to see that even in destruction, the cycle continues. Temples taught this truth in rituals and gardens. Stones were placed not to endure forever, but to remind viewers of the flow of time. Lanterns glowed for a night, then went dark. Sand was raked into patterns, then erased at dawn. Every act was temporary, yet in its very fleetingness, it became sacred. The monk who painted a character with brush and ink knew it could not be rewritten. The host of a tea ceremony knew the meeting could never be repeated. Each act was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Ichigo Ichi. For the samurai, this philosophy became strength. To accept death was to free oneself from fear. To act in clarity, without clinging to life, was to embody dignity. Their sword was not only a weapon, but a mirror of impermanence, sharp, decisive, final. A warrior might fall, but his honor remained, his spirit living on in memory, in poetry, in the cherry blossoms drifting each spring. For peasants, impermanence meant resilience. Fields might flood, villages might burn, lords might change, but life continued. A farmer planted again after war. A mother cooked rice over a new hearth. Children laughed even after sorrow. To endure was not to deny change, but to live within it, to bend like bamboo in the wind. Their strength was humble. Their philosophy lived not in words, but in breath, in work, in care. Picture a tea gathering at the close of the Sengoku age. The host bows, preparing tea in a simple clay bowl. The guests sit silently, aware that this meeting, this night, this moment will never return. Outside, cherry blossoms drift in the wind, some falling upon the tatami mats. The host places the bowl before a guest, who receives it with care. For a moment, all else, war, ambition, fear, fades. Only the warmth of the tea, the glow of lantern light, the falling of blossoms remain. The impermanence of the moment is its beauty. Even castles, grand in stone and wood, carried this truth. Many were burned in war, their ruins scattered across the hills. Yet even in ruins, they carried presence. Moss growing on stone, flowers blooming in cracks, villagers remembering the lives once lived within. The impermanence of castles made them not weaker, but part of the same cycle that touched blossoms, rivers, and lives as the Sengoku age neared its end. With unifiers rising to bring the land together, people looked back upon decades of war and saw impermanence written across the land. Lords had risen and fallen, alliances formed and shattered, villages destroyed and rebuilt. And yet, Japan endured. The impermanence of war itself gave way to new order, just as storms give way to clear skies. As you close your eyes, imagine standing beneath a cherry tree at dusk. Petals drift softly upon the wind, falling into a river that carries them away. Each petal is unique, each moment fleeting, yet together they form a beauty beyond permanence. The river flows, the blossoms fall, the world changes, and in that change lies peace. This is the philosophy of medieval Japan, the quiet acceptance of impermanence, the beauty of the fleeting, the dignity of the fragile. In times of peace, a castle was a symbol of order, a place where lords governed, where artisans worked, where families lived beneath the banner of their daimyo. But in the Sengoku period, when Japan was divided by rival warlords, castles became not only symbols but necessities. They rose across the land like islands of stone and wood, strongholds in a sea of war. Upon their walls, battles were decided. Within their halls, alliances were forged and broken. To see a castle upon a hill was to know both safety and danger. Sanctuary for those inside, and warning for those beyond. The castles of the Sengoku age were larger, stronger, and more complex than those of earlier centuries. They stood upon hills and mountains, their foundations carved from stone, their towers rising with tiered roofs. Around them stretched moats, palisades, and gates designed to slow and confuse attackers. Paths to the gates twisted deliberately, forcing enemies to climb, to turn, to expose themselves at every step. The architecture was not only functional but symbolic, a visible declaration of power, endurance, and ambition. Imagine approaching one of these castles at dawn. Mist clings to the slopes, banners flutter from tall towers, and the sound of drums echoes faintly within. The stone walls rise steeply, their angles precise, their surfaces lined with moss. Guards stand at the gates, spears in hand, their eyes steady. Behind them lies a world of order, courtyards where soldiers drill, granaries filled with rice, halls where lords sit in council. Beyond the castle walls, villages bow to its shadow, their lives tied to the power it represents. For the daimyo, castles were both military and political centers. Here they commanded armies, stored provisions, and received messengers from allies and rivals. The halls rang with the sound of deliberation, strategies drawn upon maps, decisions whispered. In corners, oaths sworn before banners. Yet the castle was also home, where families lived, where gardens bloomed, where rituals of tea and poetry softened the harshness of war. The contradiction was striking. Weapons stored in one hall, incense burning in another, swords polished. In the courtyard, children playing in the chambers. During sieges, castles became fortresses of endurance. Attacking armies surrounded them, cutting off supplies, launching arrows and fire. Defenders stood upon walls, loosing arrows, pouring stones and boiling water upon climbers. For weeks, sometimes months, these struggles continued, hunger gnawing at those inside, determination driving those outside. Victory came not only through strength but through patience, through the endurance of walls and spirit alike. Picture a siege in midsummer. The air is heavy with heat. Banners of the attacking army wave below, their drums beating steadily. Within the castle, soldiers stand upon walls, sweat running down their faces, bows in hand. Women carry water to the defenders, children gather stones to hurl from the towers. In the granaries, rice is measured carefully, each grain precious. At night, lanterns glow along the walls, while fires burn in the enemy camp below. The stars watch both sides, silent witnesses to the waiting game of war. Yet castles were not only strongholds of violence. They became centers of culture. Lords hosted tea ceremonies in quiet rooms. Poets composed verses about the moon seen from towers. Painters decorated screens with cranes and pine trees. Even amidst war, the Japanese instinct for beauty remained, softening stone with art, blending strength with grace. A visitor could walk through a gate armed with spears, then step into a room where tea was served in silence, scrolls hung with poetry upon the wall. The contrast was not contradiction, but balance, the recognition that life, even in war, required both steel and silence. Villages surrounding castles lived in their orbit. Farmers paid taxes and rice. Artisans crafted armor and weapons. Merchants brought supplies. In return, the castle offered protection, or at least the promise of it. Its walls were a reminder that someone held authority, that there was order in chaos, however fragile. For villagers, to see the castle lit at night was to know their lives were tied to the fate of the Lord within that as evening falls. Imagine standing on a hill overlooking such a stronghold. The castle rises from stone, its towers gleaming faintly in lantern light. Below, the village glows with smaller lamps, smoke drifting from hearths. Beyond, the land stretches into darkness, dotted with other castles, other lords, other ambitions. The age is one of war, yet within the castle walls, life continues, fragile, enduring, bound by both steel and silence. The castles of the Sengoku age remind us that strength is not only in weapons, but in walls that protect, in spaces that endure, in the balance between shadow and light. They stand as symbols of ambition, of endurance, of impermanence. Many have fallen, their stones scattered, their timbers burned. Yet even their ruins whisper of the age they once commanded, the storms they once withstood. As you rest tonight, imagine walking through the corridors of such a castle. Lanterns glow against wooden beams, the sound of a drum echoes in the distance, and outside the walls, the world waits in silence. This is the castle of medieval Japan, fortress, home, symbol, shadow. When history speaks of war, it often remembers the lords, the castles, the great battles named for valleys and rivers. But beneath those banners walked countless men and women whose names were never written, whose lives carried the true weight of the Sengoku age. For peasants and foot soldiers, war was not glory but burden, not conquest but survival. They lived in the shadows of the daimyo's ambitions, carrying rice, wielding spears, tending fields when they could, fighting when they must. The peasants of medieval Japan already bore heavy loads. They worked rice paddies from dawn to dusk, their lives tied to the rhythm of planting and harvest. Under the Sengoku Wars, their burdens grew heavier. Armies needed food, and rice was drawn from villages in great measure. Farmers often had to part with most of their harvest, storing little for their families. When the fields lay in the path of armies, they could be trampled, burned, or seized. To be a farmer in this age was to live with uncertainty each season. A question of survival. Imagine a village on the edge of a contested province. Farmers bend in the fields, planting seedlings in lines across flooded paddies. Over the horizon, dust rises, a marching army. The villagers pause, their hands still, dripping with water, and hurry to hide what rice they can, knowing soldiers may soon pass. The rhythm of planting is interrupted by fear. Yet once the soldiers move on, the villagers return to their work, for the rice cannot wait, and life must continue. From these villages came the Ishigaru, the foot soldiers of the Sengoku armies. Many were peasants drafted into service, carrying spears or bows, clad in simple armor of leather and iron. They marched under the banners of their lords, fought in muddy fields, slept on the ground beneath open skies. Their training was minimal, their weapons often crude, yet their numbers gave strength to the armies. For every samurai in polished armor, there were many a shigaroo in patched clothes, standing in ranks, their lives as fragile as reeds in the wind. Picture a camp at night. A shigaroo sit around small fires, their spears laid beside them. They eat rice gruel from wooden bowls, share stories of villages left behind, whisper fears of the coming battle. Some sharpen blades, others mend sandals, others simply stare into the flames. Around them, the banners of the daimyo flap in the wind, their symbols bold against the darkness. Above, the stars shine indifferent, watching over warriors and peasants alike. For peasants turned soldiers, war was not always choice. Loyalty was demanded, taxes enforced, service required. Some went willingly, hoping for reward or advancement, but most went because they must. To refuse was to risk punishment. To obey was to risk death. Between these two burdens, they walked the narrow path of endurance. Women, too, bore the shadow of war. They guarded homes, protected children, harvested fields when men were gone. In some cases, they took up weapons, defending villages or castles when armies attacked. They endured raids, fires, and hunger, carrying their families through hardship with quiet resilience. Their stories, rarely told, shaped the unseen strength of the Sengoku age. Despite the weight of war, moments of humanity remained. Soldiers sang songs as they marched, simple verses to ease long roads. In camps, they played games with stones or dice, laughter breaking the silence. In villages, peasants celebrated festivals when they could, lighting lanterns, dancing in circles, offering prayers for peace. Even amidst war, the human spirit sought joy, sought light, sought moments of rest. Imagine a farmer returning from service as an Ishigaru. His clothes are torn, his sandals worn, his spear broken. He kneels at the threshold of his home. His children rush to him, his wife bows in silence. He eats rice from a cracked bowl, lies down upon a mat, and listens to the wind rustling bamboo outside. The war continues beyond his village, but for this night, he is home, and the sound of his family's breath is stronger than the clash of distant swords. The lives of peasants and soldiers remind us that history is not only made by lords and battles, but by those who endure beneath them. Their struggles were heavy, their joys fleeting, their resilience quiet but eternal. They lived in shadow, yet without them, the age could not have been sustained. As you drift into rest, imagine walking through a quiet village after battle. The fields are scarred, but rice grows again. Children chase each other between paddies, women hang cloth to dry, men mend tools in silence. In the distance, a banner flutters upon a hill, but in the village, life continues, fragile, humble, enduring. For centuries, Japan had lived under the balance of emperor, shogun, and samurai lords. Though fragile, the system endured, binding provinces together through duty, rice, and loyalty. Yet by the mid-15th century, the threads began to fray. The authority of the Ashikaga shogunate weakened, rival clans grew bolder, and soon the land dissolved into chaos. This age became known as the Sengoku period, the Warring States era, when castles rose, alliances shifted like wind, and every province seemed to carry the shadow of battle. The spark came with the Unwind War, 1467 to 1477, fought in Kyoto itself. What began as a dispute over succession to the shogunate turned into a decade of destruction. Samurai armies filled the capital, mansions burned, temples collapsed, families fled. The city, once elegant with gardens and theaters, became a field of ash. From this war, the shogunate's authority never fully recovered. The Ashikaga still sat in Kyoto, but their power was a shadow, their voice faint in a land now ruled by the sword. Imagine Kyoto during this war. Flames rise above tiled roofs. The golden pavilion reflects not peace, but fire. Streets once filled with poets now echo with the clash of steel. Families clutch their children, fleeing into the night. Monks chant prayers as temples collapse. The air is thick with smoke, the river choked with debris. Out of this chaos, Japan enters a new age, one of division, of warlords, of constant shifting ground. Across the provinces, daimyo, regional lords, grew strong. Each built castles upon hills, gathered armies of samurai and foot soldiers, and ruled their lands like independent rulers. Alliances were made and broken, vassals shifted loyalties, and battles erupted with little warning. Rice became not only sustenance, but weapon, its control deciding victory or famine. Villages were taxed, conscripts drawn into armies, artisans commanded to forge weapons instead of bowls. Yet even in this age of strife, life continued. Farmers still planted rice, children still played, monks still rang temple bells. The wars came and went like storms, leaving scars, but beneath them, the rhythm of daily life endured. The people adjusted, living in the shadows of castles, bowing to whichever lord held power, praying for peace, but surviving through resilience. Castles grew larger, more fortified. No longer only wooden palisades, they became vast complexes with stone foundations, watchtowers, and moats. From these strongholds, warlords commanded armies and displayed authority. Their banners flew high, their samurai rode in armor lacquered bright, their retainers carried spears and bows. Villagers looked up at these castles and saw not only protection but also power, symbols of strength in a time of uncertainty. The Sengoku period was marked not only by war, but by stories of ambition. Lords such as Takeda Shinjin, Yusuji Kenshin, Oda Nobunaga, and many others rose to prominence, each carving their place in history. Their battles were fierce, their strategies brilliant, their dreams vast. Yet for most, the age was less about glory than survival, less about conquest than endurance. Imagine a village beneath the walls of a daimyo's castle. Soldiers march through the streets, their spears glinting. Farmers bow low, offering rice as tax. Merchants unload supplies, cloth, salt, oil, for the Lord's army. At night, the villagers hear the distant sound of drums from the castle, signaling drills and watch. Above, the torches of the watchtowers glow, casting long shadows upon the fields. For the villagers, peace and war are no longer opposites, but intertwined, part of the same uncertain rhythm. And yet, even in war, culture did not vanish. Tea ceremonies were held in castles. Poets composed verses about the moon seen through smoke. Painters created ink scrolls that spoke of both beauty and impermanence. In the midst of battle, warriors carried not only swords but also small charms, reminders of family, of spirit, of the fragility of life. The Sengoku period was brutal, but it was also deeply human, filled with both violence and longing. As evening falls in this imagined world, picture a battlefield after the clash. The cries have ceased, the smoke drifts away, and the field lies silent beneath the stars. Lanterns glow in a castle in the distance. Monks chant sutras for the dead, and farmers return cautiously to their fields. Life, fragile and enduring, continues. The Sengoku period reminds us that even in chaos, beauty can survive, and even in war, silence can be found. It teaches that history is not only glory and destruction, but resilience, the quiet endurance of people who live beneath the shadow of constant strife. As you close your eyes, imagine standing upon a hill overlooking the land. Castles to the horizon, banners flutter in the wind, villages glow faintly with lanterns. The land is divided, but still alive, still enduring. This is medieval Japan. In its age of war, fragile, turbulent, but eternal in its spirit. In the great castles and temples of medieval Japan, decisions of power and spirit were shaped, but in the quiet villages where most people lived, religion was not ceremony alone, it was life itself. The peasants who rose at dawn to tend the rice fields, who drew water from wells, who shared meals in humble homes, lived in a world filled with spirits. Their days were guided not only by the demands of lords and taxes, but by rituals that honored ancestors, gods of the fields, and the unseen presences that dwelled in rivers, mountains, and trees. Shinto, the way of the gods, was woven deeply into village life. It taught that the natural world was alive with kami, spirits or presences that inhabited every stream, stone, and stalk of rice. For a farmer, this meant the rice itself was sacred, its growth not only labor, but miracle. Before planting, Prayers were offered to the spirits of the fields. At harvest, offerings of the first grain were placed upon wooden altars, thanks given for the abundance of the land. Life was a cycle of work and devotion, labor and gratitude, field and shrine. Imagine a spring festival in a village. Farmers gather before planting, carrying rice seedlings in baskets. At the shrine, built of wood and thatch, they bow before a simple altar decorated with pine branches. The priest waves a white paper wand, purifying the space. Children laugh, carrying lanterns painted with cranes and blossoms. After prayers, music rises, drums beat, flutes play, dancers in masks step into the square. The festival is both sacred and joyous, a moment when labor becomes celebration, when gods and humans share the same space. Buddhism, too, was present in daily life. Monks visited villages, chanting sutras, blessing homes, performing funerals. Families prayed before small household altars, placing offerings of rice, water, and incense for ancestors. The dead were not gone, but present in spirit, watching over the living. To care for them was to care for oneself, for life and death were not opposites, but part of the same flow. The two traditions did not stand apart, but blended. A farmer might pray to the kami of the fields for a good harvest, and then ask a Buddhist monk to bless the granary. A family might attend a Shinto festival in spring and a Buddhist ritual for ancestors in summer. The gods of nature and the teachings of Buddha moved together, like two rivers joining in one flow. This blending created a faith that was not rigid, but fluid, shaped by the rhythm of the land and the needs of the people. Superstitions and folk beliefs added to this world. Villagers spoke of spirits that haunted rivers, foxes that tricked travelers, ghosts that lingered near crossroads. Charms were hung above doors to ward off misfortune, prayers whispered to protect children from sickness. At night, when the wind moved through bamboo, when shadows flickered in lamplight, stories were told of wandering spirits, both fearful and protective. These tales were not distractions, but lessons, reminders of humility, of respect, of the mystery that lived all around. Picture an autumn evening in a village. Families gather around the hearth, the smell of rice and miso filling the room. An elder tells a story of a fox spirit who disguised itself as a beautiful woman, teaching children to be wary of the unknown. Outside, lanterns glow in the fields, protecting the harvest from wandering souls. The air is crisp, the stars bright, the rituals of the day completed. In this small circle of warmth, life is both fragile and secure, sustained by devotion. Village rituals often carried the rhythm of seasons. New Year began with purification, homes swept clean, offerings placed at shrines. Spring honored planting, summer the ancestors, autumn the harvest, winter the renewal of time. These rituals gave structure to life, turning the hardships of labor into a cycle of meaning. To plant rice was not only to work, but to honor. To harvest grain was not only to eat, but to give thanks. Even in the presence of samurai, even under the weight of taxes and duty, the peasants found dignity in these rituals. Their lives may not have been recorded in chronicles, but in the rhythm of prayer and offering, they sustained not only themselves, but the entire structure of medieval Japan. As you close your eyes, imagine standing in a rice field at dawn. Mist drifts above the water, frogs croak, cranes lift into the sky. Farmers bow their heads, whispering prayers to the spirits of the fields. A monk chants in the distance, his voice blending with the wind. The land is alive, the rice sacred, the cycle eternal. This is the quiet faith of medieval Japan, spirits in the rice fields, prayers in every breath, devotion in every season. Among the many arts of medieval Japan, none carried the quiet power of ink and brush. Unlike castles, which stood tall, or swords, which glinted in battle, calligraphy and painting were arts of silence, delicate gestures upon paper that captured both discipline and beauty. A single brushstroke, made with intention, could embody the spirit of the writer. A painting of bamboo, done in a few lines of ink, could suggest not only the plant itself but the philosophy of impermanence, resilience, and grace. The practice of calligraphy was not merely writing words. It was an act of meditation. The brush was dipped into ink, lifted carefully, and guided with patience. Each stroke had to be deliberate. There was no erasing, no return, no hesitation. The line was final, alive, carrying the presence of its maker. To write a character was to express the self, the moment, the flow of spirit. Imagine a monk in a temple hall at dawn. Before him lies a strip of paper, beside him a block of ink and a stone to grind it. He pours water onto the stone, slowly grinding. The ink sticks until black liquid gathers. The air smells faintly of pine and soot. He dips his brush, lifts it, and begins. With a single movement, he writes a character, strong, flowing, alive. The sound of the brush against paper is soft, like a whisper. The act is not only writing, but meditation, each stroke a mirror of his spirit. Calligraphy was deeply tied to Zen philosophy. It reflected the teaching that the present moment was all that existed. Each stroke was a moment, unrepeatable, complete in itself. A shaky line revealed hesitation. A firm line revealed clarity. To master calligraphy was to master the self, for the brush betrayed all, the steadiness of breath, the focus of mind, the balance of spirit. Alongside calligraphy grew the art of ink painting, or sumi-e. Using only black ink, artists created entire worlds with a few strokes. Mountains, rivers, bamboo groves, and cranes appeared in lines that were both simple and profound. The absence of color was not limitation, but strength, for the spaces left empty carried as much meaning as the ink itself. The white of the paper was not background, but silence, giving breath to the forms. Picture an artist sitting in a wooden hall, brush poised above the paper. With a flick, a mountain appears, bold, towering. With a softer stroke, mist drifts across its slopes. A few quick lines become bamboo, their stalks bending in the wind. A final touch places a bird in flight, its wings outstretched. The painting is finished, not detailed, but alive. In its emptiness, the viewer finds space for imagination, for reflection, for peace. The subjects of these paintings often carried meaning. Bamboo symbolized resilience, bending without breaking. Plum blossoms spoke of endurance, blooming even in the snow. Cranes represented longevity, mountain stability, rivers impermanence. Each line, each choice, was not only art but teaching. To gaze upon such paintings was to be reminded of the truths of life, spoken not in words but in silence. These arts were practiced by monks, samurai, and nobles alike. Samurai, trained in discipline, found in calligraphy a reflection of their practice with the sword, the same need for focus, for intention, for decisiveness. A stroke of the brush was like a stroke of the blade. Final, clear, without hesitation. Nobles in Kyoto composed poetry and adorned it with calligraphy, their verses flowing across scrolls, their words joined with images of blossoms and birds. Monks copied sutras by hand, each character a prayer, each page a meditation upon truth. Imagine an evening in Kyoto. A noblewoman sits by lantern light, brush in hand. She writes a poem upon pale paper, her characters flowing like streams. A monk in a distant temple paints a scroll of mountains, his strokes swift, his mind calm. A samurai in his study practices writing the same character again and again, his movements steady, his spirit sharpened by repetition. Across the land, brush and ink unite people in silence, their strokes carrying beauty into eternity. The art of the brush reminds us that beauty need not be loud or complex. It can live in a single line, a single character, a single moment. It teaches that what is left unsaid, what is left unpainted, is as important as what is expressed. It embodies the philosophy of impermanence. Each stroke final, each painting unrepeatable, each moment precious. As you rest tonight, imagine the sound of brush upon paper, the smell of pine ink, the sight of bamboo painted in flowing lines. Imagine sitting in a quiet hall, lanterns glowing softly, watching as characters appear stroke by stroke, simple yet eternal. This is the beauty of medieval Japan, the brush of silence, the ink of impermanence, the art of shadows and breath. Medieval Japan, though shadowed by samurai and shoguns, was not without light. Its villages and towns, its temples and castles, were brightened by the rhythm of the seasons, marked by festivals that brought community together. These were moments when work paused, when duty gave way to joy, when the air filled with music, laughter, and the glow of lanterns. In a world of discipline and hierarchy, festivals were reminders that life, like blossoms, was fleeting and meant to be cherished. The cycle of the year unfolded in harmony with nature. Planting in spring, harvest in autumn, snow in winter, blossoms in spring once more. Each season carried its own festivals, blending Shinto rituals with Buddhist prayers, local customs with ancient traditions. The people of medieval Japan lived close to the earth, and their celebrations mirrored the rhythm of rivers, winds, and fields. Spring brought the festival of cherry blossoms, Hanami, when families and friends gathered beneath flowering trees. In village courtyards and castle gardens alike, people spread mats, shared sake, and watched as petals drifted like snow. Children played beneath the blossoms, couples composed poems, elders raised cups in quiet reflection. The beauty was brief, lasting only a few days, yet that impermanence gave it depth. To sit beneath falling blossoms was to remember that life itself was as fleeting, as beautiful, as fragile. Summer was marked by festivals of fire and water. Bonfires lit the hillsides during Obon, when the spirits of ancestors were believed to return. Lanterns floated upon rivers, their flames drifting like stars across dark water, guiding souls back to the other world. Families gathered to honor the dead, to dance in circles, to share food and memory. In towns, fireworks lit the skies, drums thundered through the streets, dancers moved in patterned steps. The summer air, heavy with heat, vibrated with sound and light. Autumn brought the harvest, a time of gratitude. Villagers carried rice to shrines, offering the first grains to the gods. Feasts were held in fields, sake flowed, and songs rose into the night. Lanterns lined paths between paddies, their glow reflecting upon the golden stalks of rice ready to be cut. Farmers, who worked endlessly, allowed themselves joy, their laughter joining with the cries of children who ran between sheaves of grain. Autumn was both an end and a beginning. The work completed, the year preparing to turn once more. Winter, though harsh, carried its own warmth. Villages gathered for New Year celebrations, sweeping away the dust of the past, welcoming fresh beginnings. Temples rang their bells 108 times, cleansing the world of sin, their deep tones echoing across snowy valleys. Families hung pine branches at their doors, lit fires in their hearths, and shared mochi rice cakes, their hands warmed by flame and companionship. Even in the cold, lanterns glowed, their lights soft against the snow. Festivals were more than entertainment, they were acts of community. They reminded people that they were not alone, that the burdens of life were shared, that joy was meant to be lived together. The samurai attended alongside farmers, monks alongside merchants, children alongside elders. Though society was divided by rank, festivals blurred those lines, if only for a night. In the soft light of lanterns and the rhythm of drums, imagine a summer evening in a medieval town. Lanterns lined the streets, their paper walls glowing with painted designs of cranes and blossoms. Dancers move in circles, their sleeves flowing, their steps steady to the beat of taiko drums. Children laugh, chasing fireflies, their faces illuminated by torchlight. Merchants sell sweets wrapped in paper, sake is poured into cups, and elders sit upon mats, smiling as they watch the young. Above, the stars glimmer, but below, the lanterns glow brighter, their flames swaying like living prayers. Or picture a quiet river during Obon. Families release lanterns into the current, each one carrying a flame for a departed ancestor. The river becomes a ribbon of light, stretching into darkness, each lantern drifting silently, its reflection doubling upon the water. The night is hushed, save for the murmur of prayers and the sound of water flowing gently downstream. In that moment, life and death, presence and absence, past and future all seem to meet in the soft glow of the flames. Festivals carried the soul of medieval Japan. They were the moments when silence became music, when shadows became light, when the weight of duty was lifted by the joy of togetherness. They were reminders that beauty is fleeting, But that fleetingness itself is beautiful. As you rest tonight, imagine sitting beneath cherry blossoms, a cup of sake in hand, petals falling around you like snow. Imagine the sound of drums echoing through summer streets, lanterns drifting on rivers, bells tolling in snowy valleys. This is the rhythm of medieval Japan, a rhythm of seasons, of festivals, of joy lived in fleeting light. Medieval Japan is often remembered for its samurai, its temples, and its gardens. Yet hidden beneath these images was another quiet force that sustained the land: the merchants and their roads of trade. Though often low in status, sometimes looked upon with suspicion for profiting from the work of others, merchants nonetheless carried the pulse of exchange, linking villages, towns, and distant provinces. Without them, the rice of one valley, the salt of one coast, the silk of one loom would never have reached beyond its borders. Their footsteps, steady and uncelebrated, bound the islands together. Imagine a narrow road at dawn, winding between rice fields. A cart creaks forward, its wooden wheels groaning. An ox pulls steadily, its breath misting in the morning air. Atop the cart, a merchant sits with bundles of cloth, jars of oil, and baskets of fish dried in salt. Behind him, apprentices walk carrying loads upon their backs, balanced with wooden poles. The road is quiet, the air filled only with the crunch of footsteps, the cry of cranes overhead. This is the world of trade. Humble, slow, but enduring. Merchants brought not only goods, but also stories. A pot of oil from one coast might carry with it tales of distant villages. A bundle of silk might come with news of war in another province. A lacquered bowl, finely polished, might tell of the skill of artisans in a far-off town. As merchants walked their routes, they carried not only wares but whispers, weaving the land together with threads of both material and memory. Their goods reflected the diversity of Japan's regions. From the seas came salt, fish, and shells. From the mountains came timber, charcoal, and iron. From villages came rice, sake, cloth, and paper. From artisans came pottery, lacquerware, and simple toys for children. In markets, these goods gathered, filling stalls with color and scent. Farmers exchanged rice for salt. Artisans traded bowls for cloth. Children begged for sweets wrapped in paper. The market was not only commerce but community, a place where lives intersected, where the hum of exchange softened the weight of daily toil. Picture a bustling town square at midday. Stalls line the street, their roofs of straw and cloth fluttering. In the wind, merchants call softly, offering goods, their voices never rising to a shout. Samurai pass through, their hands resting on swords, their eyes watching. Farmers kneel before baskets of rice, bartering with merchants over weight and measure. Children run between stalls, their laughter mixing with the low murmur of trade. The air smells of fish, of sake, of roasted chestnuts. The market is alive, yet calm, a steady rhythm rather than a storm. Though vital, merchants occupied a paradoxical place in society. Samurai and farmers were honored for their roles in protection and production, artisans for their craft. Merchants, however, were seen as taking without creating, moving what others had made. For this reason, they ranked lowest in the social order. Yet in practice, many became wealthy, building networks of influence, even lending money to samurai who lived by honor but often struggled with debt. Status and reality moved in different directions, and merchants lived between them, disrespected in word, yet indispensable in fact. Ships also carried trade along the coasts and rivers. Small boats, their sails of cloth patched and worn, moved salt, rice, and timber between ports. Larger ships sailed across to China and Korea, bringing back silk, porcelain, books, and new ideas. Foreign trade was often controlled by the shogunate, carefully watched, but it brought richness to Japanese life. A single Chinese bowl, painted with blue designs, might sit in a tea house, treasured not for its cost but for its rarity, its whisper of a distant land. Trade routes were also spiritual routes. Merchants carried not only goods, but offerings for shrines, lanterns for temples, incense for rituals. Pilgrims walked alongside them, bound for sacred mountains or famous temples, their staffs clicking against the road. The roads of trade became the roads of prayer, commerce and spirit flowing together in silence. As evening falls, imagine a merchant arriving at a village. He unrolls cloth dyed deep indigo, sets jars of oil upon the ground, opens a basket of dried fish. Villagers gather, their faces warm with welcome. Coins clink softly, rice changes hands, laughter rises in the air. The merchant bows, smiling, his cart lighter, his purse heavier. Tomorrow he will move on, but tonight he shares sake with his hosts, listening to stories by the fire. The roads of medieval Japan were not paved with stone, nor lined with grandeur. They were narrow, winding, often muddy. Yet along them flowed the lifeblood of the land. The merchants who walked them may not have been celebrated, but they carried the quiet strength of connection, weaving villages, towns, and provinces into one. As you drift into rest, imagine walking one of these roads at dusk. The fields stretch out on either side, the sky glows with fading light, the cart creaks ahead, and the lanterns of a village flicker in the distance. The road is long, but steady, filled with the whispers of trade and the footsteps of centuries. These are the silent roads of medieval Japan, humble, enduring, eternal. In medieval Japan, beauty was not loud or extravagant. It did not shout from towering monuments or glittering halls. Instead, it whispered from moss-covered stones, from the curl of steam rising from a cup of tea, from the silent arc of a garden path. Here, beauty was not decoration, but practice, not luxury, but discipline, not separate from daily life, but woven into it. The people of this era understood that to live well was not to possess much, but to shape each moment into something worthy of reverence. Gardens became one of the most visible expressions of this philosophy. They were not arranged to mimic nature in its fullness, but to distill it into essence. A mountain suggested by a rock, a river by raked sand, a forest by a single pine tree leaning with age. The act of arranging these gardens was a form of meditation, a way of shaping silence into space. Walking through them was not mere leisure, but ritual, each step guided, each view composed to draw the eye into contemplation. Imagine a Zen monk raking the sand of a dry garden at dawn. His wooden rake leaves flowing lines across the surface, like waves upon water. The garden is small, yet it contains the world, mountains in stone, rivers in sand, eternity in moss. A visitor sits on the wooden veranda, gazing quietly, the sound of the rake blending with the call of a bird. The garden is not a place to walk, but to see, to pause, to breathe. The tea ceremony carried the same spirit. Known as shinoyu, it was not simply about drinking tea, but about shaping an encounter into a ritual of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. A host prepared tea with deliberate movements, heating water, whisking powdered green tea, presenting the bowl, while guests sat in silence, receiving it with bows of gratitude. The utensils were plain, the bowls often rough, valued not for perfection but for imperfection, for the human touch they revealed. Picture a small tea house in a castle garden. The roof is low, the walls simple, the entrance so narrow that all must bow to enter. Inside, tatami mats line the floor, and in the alcove hangs a single scroll with a brush-painted poem. The host moves slowly, his gestures graceful, each one practiced yet humble. He pours water, whisks the tea, and places the bowl before the guest. The guest lifts it carefully, turning it slightly before drinking, honoring both the tea and the hands that prepared it. Silence fills the space, yet it is not empty. It is alive with respect. The tea ceremony was more than a ritual of drink. It was a school of life. It taught guests to value the fleeting moment, to notice the sound of boiling water, the scent of tatami, the weight of the bowl in their hands. It taught humility, for all entered the tea house equally, whether lord or farmer, setting aside rank. For the quiet of the ritual, it taught impermanence, for each meeting was unique, never to be repeated again. The Japanese call this awareness ichigo ichi, one time, one meeting. The understanding that every moment is precious because it cannot return. The samurai themselves embraced this ritual. For warriors who lived by the sword, the tea ceremony offered balance, a reminder that strength required stillness, that discipline required gentleness. To lay aside armor and sit in a tea house was not weakness, but wisdom, the recognition that even in an age of war, beauty and silence mattered. Gardens and tea were joined in spirit. Both embodied the philosophy of impermanence, of balance, of reverence for simplicity. Both transformed ordinary materials, sand, stone, moss, water, leaves, into vessels of meaning. Both taught that beauty was not in extravagance, but in subtlety, in restraint, in quiet. Imagine evening in such a garden. Lanterns glow softly along stone paths, their light flickering on moss and water. A group of guests steps into a tea house, bowing low. Inside, the host prepares tea in silence. His hands steady, his face calm. The sound of water boiling blends with the chirp of crickets, the rustle of bamboo in the wind. Guests sip tea, their eyes lowered, their hearts stilled. Outside, the moon rises, its reflection shimmering in the pond. The garden, the tea, the moment, all become one. As you drift into rest. Imagine sitting on the wooden veranda of a temple garden, a bowl of warm tea in your hands, the scent of moss and pine in the air. Imagine the lanterns glowing, the sand raked into flowing rivers, the silence of the night surrounding you. This is the art of medieval Japan, beauty shaped not for grandeur, but for quiet, not for eternity, but for this fleeting moment, precious and complete. In medieval Japan, the paths of warriors and monks often crossed. At first glance, they seemed worlds apart, one devoted to war, the other to peace, one trained in the art of the sword, the other in the art of meditation. And yet, over centuries, these two currents joined, flowing together into a philosophy that shaped both battlefield and temple. The marriage of Zen and the way of the samurai. Zen Buddhism, which had come to Japan from China, emphasized simplicity, stillness, and direct experience. It taught that enlightenment could not be found in endless words, but in silence, in discipline, in the awareness of each passing moment. The samurai, living in a world where death could come at any instant, found in Zen a mirror of their own lives. To live with readiness, to accept impermanence, to act with clarity. These were lessons both monk and warrior understood. Imagine a samurai entering a temple at dawn. His armor clinks softly as he kneels before the altar. He places his sword beside him and bows his head. The monks around him sit in meditation, their robes rustling faintly, their breaths slow and steady. The samurai closes his eyes, inhales deeply, and lets silence fill him. For a moment, the sword and the silence are one. The practice of meditation, or zazen, became a discipline for warriors as much as monks. Sitting motionless, focusing on breath, clearing the mind of distraction, these were not only spiritual exercises, but training for the battlefield. A warrior who could calm his heart in silence could also steady it in combat. The stillness before a strike, the breath before a charge, the acceptance of life and death, all found resonance in Zen. Even the arts of war reflected Zen's influence. Archery became not only a matter of hitting a target, but of harmony between body, bow, and spirit. Swordsmanship became not only cutting down an opponent, but cutting through fear, through hesitation, through illusion. The act of drawing the blade was compared to the act of awakening, sudden, decisive, clear. Temples themselves welcomed warriors. Many samurai became patrons of monasteries, building halls and gardens, supporting monks with rice and coin. In return, they received teachings, guidance, and the calm presence of the temple's silence. Some samurai even became monks in later life, exchanging armor for robes, carrying the discipline of war into the discipline of prayer. One famous figure, Muzo Soseki, a Zen monk of the 14th century, became advisor to shoguns and daimyo alike. He taught rulers the art of stillness, designed gardens that embodied the philosophy of impermanence, and bridged the world of politics with the world of spirit. His presence reminds us that monks and warriors did not live apart, but often shaped one another. Picture an evening scene. A samurai sits in a temple garden, his sword resting beside him. The stones are raked into flowing lines, the lanterns glow softly, the air hums with the chant of monks. He gazes at the sand, at the pine tree bending in the breeze, at the reflection of the moon in a pool of water. In this stillness, he finds not weakness, but strength, the strength to accept death, to serve with clarity, to live in harmony with impermanence. This union of Zen and the sword did not make the samurai peaceful. They still fought, still defended, still served their lords in battle. But it gave their lives a deeper rhythm, a sense of dignity, a calm in the face of chaos. It taught them that to master the sword was also to master the self, that to strike with clarity required silence within. As you close your eyes, imagine the quiet hall of a temple, the rows of monks seated in meditation, the samurai among them, his sword resting silently. Imagine the slow rhythm of breath, the flicker of lanterns, the sound of a bell tolling across valleys. In that moment, war and peace are not opposites, but reflections, joined in stillness. This is the way of medieval Japan, the sword and the silence, the warrior and the monk, the shadow and the breath. If castles were the strongholds of power, and temples the sanctuaries of spirit, then theaters were the spaces where story and silence intertwined. In medieval Japan, a unique art form emerged, no theater, a performance of slowness, of masks, of movements so restrained they seemed like meditations. To watch No was not to be dazzled by spectacle, but to be drawn into stillness, to hear silence made visible, to see shadows given shape upon a wooden stage. The origins of No trace back to dances and rituals, to village performances and shrine ceremonies. Over centuries, these elements blended with courtly refinement and Buddhist philosophy until they became a formalized art. By the 14th century, under the patronage of the Ashikaga shoguns, No reached its form, austere, elegant, spiritual. Unlike other theaters of the world, filled with clamor and applause, No was quiet, slow, deliberate, its every gesture carrying weight. Imagine entering a No stage. It is simple, a wooden platform, roofed like a shrine, polished until it glows softly in lamplight. A pine tree is painted upon the back wall, eternal, unchanging, a symbol of longevity and spirit. Musicians sit to one side with drums and flutes, their instruments ready but still. The audience waits in silence, their eyes fixed on the stage. And then, slowly, the actor appears. He wears a mask, carved of wood, painted with delicate expression. It may be the face of a woman, serene and sorrowful. It may be the face of an old man, lined with wisdom and weariness. It may be the face of a ghost, pale and haunting. The mask never changes, and yet, as the actor tilts his head, as shadows fall, as light shifts, the expression transforms. In stillness, the mask smiles, then weeps, then gazes into eternity. It is art not of movement, but of suggestion, of silence filled with meaning. The actors move slowly, each gesture precise. A step forward, a turn of the wrist, the raising of a sleeve, all speak more than words. The chant of the chorus begins, low and resonant, carrying the story in rhythmic verses. The flute plays a high, haunting note. The drum echoes like a heartbeat. Together, they weave atmosphere, not action, creating a world of shadows and memory. The stories of No were often drawn from history, from legend, from ghostly encounters. A warrior slain in battle returns as a spirit, recounting his sorrow. A woman abandoned by love wanders in grief, her soul restless. A monk encounters a ghost, who tells of a past unredeemed. The plays were not about victory or triumph, but about impermanence, about the fragile nature of life, about the beauty and sadness of fleeting moments. The audience. No was more than entertainment. It was meditation, a mirror of Buddhist teachings. To sit in stillness, to listen to the chant, to watch the mask transform, was to reflect upon impermanence, upon sorrow, upon the fleeting beauty of blossoms and lives alike. The stage became a temple, the performance a ritual, the story a teaching. Imagine an evening in Kyoto. Lanterns glow around the stage. The audience sits wrapped in silence. The actor moves, his mask shining faintly, his voice echoing with chant. The flute rises, the drum beats softly. Outside, the moon glows upon temple roofs. The river reflects its light. Inside, the world of No unfolds, slow, austere, eternal. The audience does not cheer, does not shout. They breathe quietly, hearts still, minds calm. The performance ends not with noise, but with silence. No reminds us that art need not be loud to endure. It shows us that stillness can hold depth, that silence can tell stories as powerfully as words. The masks of No are not merely faces. They are mirrors of human spirit, capturing sorrow, joy, longing, and impermanence in wood and paint as you drift into rest. Imagine the pine tree painted upon the stage, the mask glowing in lamplight, the flute's note lingering in the air. Imagine the slow steps of the actor, the chant of the chorus, the silence of the audience. This is the art of medieval Japan, the drama of shadows, the theater of silence, the poetry of impermanence. When we hear the word castle, we often think of stone towers rising into the sky, battlements of Europe standing unbroken against centuries of storms. But in medieval Japan, castles were different. They were not only fortresses of defense, but living spaces of governance, symbols of authority, and even reflections of beauty in their harmony with the land. Built first of wood, earth, and stone foundations, they rose like extensions of the mountains and forests around them, blending strength with elegance, shadow with silence. The earliest castles of Japan were not the towering white structures of later centuries, but simple fortifications. Palisades of wood, ditches carved into earth, watchtowers standing against the horizon. They were built to protect provinces, to shelter lords and samurai, to hold granaries and armories within. Yet even in their simplicity, they carried presence. To see a castle upon a hill was to feel the weight of authority, the quiet watch of power. Imagine approaching such a fortress at dusk. A wooden palisade rises above, torches flickering along its gates. Samurai stand guard, their silhouettes sharp against the firelight. Inside, wooden halls cluster around courtyards, smoke curling gently from hearths. Horses are tethered near stables, armor stored in neat rows, banners hanging silently in the cool evening air. The castle is not grand, but it breathes authority. Steady and enduring as time passed, castles grew more elaborate. Stone foundations were laid, rising in slopes that seemed like mountains carved by human hands. Upon these stones, wooden halls and towers stood, their roofs curved like wings. The architecture carried not only defense, but beauty. White plaster walls gleamed in sunlight, tiles lined in symmetry, gardens planted within their grounds. These were not only fortresses, but living spaces, homes for lords, courts for governance, sanctuaries for warriors, symbols for all who lived below their shadow. Inside, life followed order. The lord received petitions in wooden halls, samurai trained. In courtyards, scribes recorded accounts in brush and ink. Women tended gardens and tea rooms. Children played with wooden toys beneath watchful eyes. The rhythm of governance flowed here. Taxes measured in rice, disputes settled, alliances forged, oaths sworn. The castle was not only stone and wood, but the living heart of feudal life. Yet defense was always present. Watchtowers lined the walls, archers stood ready, gates reinforced with heavy timbers. The slopes of stone foundations, angled outward, made climbing difficult for attackers. Bridges could be drawn, gates barred, fires lit. To assault such a fortress was not easy, for every path twisted, every wall stood ready. The castle was both shield and home, both fortress and symbol. Castles also held beauty in balance with their strength. Gardens lay within their grounds, ponds reflecting moonlight, bridges arching softly over water. Samurai walked these gardens at dusk, their swords at their sides, their hearts calmed by the sight of blossoms falling upon rippling water. The tea ceremony was often performed within castle rooms, a reminder that even amidst defense, life required stillness, ritual, and beauty. Picture a castle on a misty morning. The stone base rises from the earth, its walls white against the sky. Pines surround its slopes, their branches bending in the wind. The sound of a drum echoes from within, calling samurai to assembly. In a high tower, a guard watches the horizon, his eyes scanning mountains and rivers. Yet in the courtyard below, a child chases a paper ball, laughter mingling with the steady toll of a temple bell. The castle holds both war and life, both shadow and light. Spiritually, castles carried meaning as well. They were not only defenses, but symbols of impermanence. Fires sometimes consumed them, earthquakes shook them, wars reduced them to ashes. And yet, like blossoms that fall and return, they were rebuilt, reshaped, renewed. Each castle carried the marks of its time, scars of fire, repairs of timber, the layering of generations. They stood as reminders that strength itself is fleeting, that even stone and wood must bow to time as evening falls. Imagine lanterns glowing along castle walls, the sound of guards' footsteps steady against stone. Inside, the Lord meets with his samurai, voices low, decisions shaping the fate of provinces. Outside, villagers look up from their fields, seeing the silhouette of the castle against the twilight sky, knowing that within those walls lies the order of their world. The castles of medieval Japan were not monuments of arrogance, but fortresses of balance. They blended strength with elegance, shadow with beauty, impermanence with endurance. They remind us that power need not be loud, that authority can live in silence, that even in defense there is space for poetry and peace. As you drift into rest, imagine walking along the stone slopes of a Japanese castle, lanterns glowing in windows, the scent of pine in the air, the sound of water flowing in a garden stream. Imagine the balance of shadow and strength, the calm presence of wood and stone. These are the castles of medieval Japan, guardians of both life and silence. The samurai were not only fighters. They were students of discipline, practitioners of arts that joined body, mind, and spirit. Their swords and bows were more than tools of war. They were instruments of philosophy, symbols of honor and reflections of the harmony between human and nature. In medieval Japan, the practice of martial skill was never only about defeating an opponent. It was about shaping the self, forging inner stillness as surely as smiths forged steel, the sword above all carried this meaning. Forged in fire, hammered and folded countless times, each blade was both practical and sacred. The swordsmith was not merely a craftsman, but a spiritual figure, treating his work as ritual. He purified himself before forging, prayed before striking steel, and worked with patience, folding the metal until it carried both strength and flexibility. To watch a swordsmith was to watch devotion made visible in sparks and flame. Imagine such a workshop at night. The forge glows red, the air heavy with heat. The smith, robes damp with sweat, lifts his hammer again and again, striking the steel. As sparks leap like fireflies into the dark, he pauses to quench the blade in water, steam rising in clouds. The sound of hammering is steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Around him, completed blades rest in silence, their polished edges reflecting the light of the fire. In this space, steel is not only shaped, spirit is woven into form. The samurai who carried these swords treated them as companions. They were polished daily, wrapped carefully, passed down through generations. To lose a sword was to lose honor. To break one was to wound the spirit. Drawing the blade was never done lightly. A sword was not a weapon of rage, but of necessity, bound by discipline and the weight of duty. Yet the bow was older still. The longbow, taller than the warrior himself, was once the mark of the samurai. Archery, or kudo, was practiced not only for battle, but as a form of meditation. To draw the bow was to steady breath, to calm the mind, to focus spirit. The arrow was not loosed in haste, but in harmony, its flight carrying intention as much as force. Even in later centuries, when guns arrived, archery remained as ritual, as philosophy, as art. Picture a samurai practicing at dawn. He kneels before a target set in a quiet field, his bow rising slowly, his breath steady. He draws the string, the arrow poised, his eyes calm. For a long moment, nothing moves. Then, with release, the arrow flies, silent and straight, striking the target with a soft thud. He bows, not in triumph, but in humility, honoring the act itself. In this practice, battle fades, and what remains is discipline, silence, and stillness. Other arts of war filled their days. Horsemanship, spear techniques, unarmed combat. Yet each was more than skill. Each was discipline, a path to balance. To ride a horse was to join with its motion, to become one with its speed. To wield a spear was to master distance and timing, patience and precision. Even the smallest movement, a stance, a breath, a turn of the hand, was practiced until it carried grace. The philosophy that guided these arts was simple yet profound: impermanence. A warrior could die at any moment, and so he must live each moment with clarity. The arts of war were not about holding on to life, but about meeting death with dignity. The sword, the bow, the spear, all were reminders that life was fleeting, that discipline was the only shield against chaos. Imagine an evening in Kamakura. A group of samurai practice in a courtyard lit by lanterns. The sound of wooden swords striking echoes softly, steady, and measured. A master watches, correcting posture, reminding his students to breathe, to focus, to respect the blade. In another corner, archers draw their bows, arrows flying into the dark with whispering speed. The air is calm, filled not with frenzy, but with rhythm. Each act is practice. Each practice is devotion. The arts of the warrior remind us that strength need not be loud. It can be silent, steady, graceful. The samurai carried their weapons not as instruments of destruction, but as mirrors of their spirit, polished daily, used sparingly, held with reverence. Their martial practice was not only survival, it was philosophy, a way of being in harmony with the fleeting nature of life. As you close your eyes, imagine the glow of the forge, the sound of hammer on steel, the flight of an arrow through dawn air. Imagine the stillness of a samurai bowing before his sword, his breath calm, his spirit steady. This is the quiet art of medieval Japan, strength shaped into silence, steel forged into spirit. History often remembers the warriors, the rulers, the monks. Yet in the shadows of medieval Japan walked women whose lives shaped the rhythm of families, villages, and even battles. Their names are fewer in the chronicles, their voices rarely recorded, but their presence was constant, in the hearth and the field, in temples, and even on the battlefield. They lived not in silence, but in quiet strength, carrying the weight of generations. In the noble courts of Kyoto, women were guardians of elegance and refinement. The Heian era had already seen women like Lady Murasaki, who wrote the tale of Genji, one of the world's first great novels. In medieval times, court women continued to shape culture through poetry, calligraphy, and the subtle art of presence. Draped in layered robes, their hair flowing long, they composed verses about the moon, the blossoms, the fleeting sadness of autumn. They were voices of impermanence, echoing the philosophy of mono no aware, the awareness of life's fragile beauty. Imagine a noble lady seated behind a screen, brush in hand. She dips it into ink and writes a poem about the sound of rain on bamboo. Her hand is steady, her words soft, yet in them lies the truth of her heart. Outside, lanterns glow in the palace gardens, and the scent of pine drifts through the night. Her voice may not command armies, but it carries through time in words still read today. Beyond the palaces, women in villages bore the weight of survival. They rose before dawn to prepare rice, to weave cloth, to tend to children while men worked the fields. Yet their work did not stop at the hearth. In harvest season, they stood ankle-deep in muddy paddies, planting and reaping alongside their husbands. In markets, they sold goods, bartered, and managed the flow of daily life. Their strength was not celebrated in songs, but it sustained entire communities. Picture a village woman in the early morning. She balances 2 buckets of water on a yoke across her shoulders, walking from the well to her home. Children follow her, laughing, carrying bundles of firewood. She sets the water down, lights the hearth, stirs the pot of rice. Later, she will weave cloth, mend clothes, and perhaps step into the fields. Her life is unrecorded, but it is as steady as the flow of rivers, carrying the community forward. And then, there were women who took up arms. Known as onabugeisha, they were female warriors trained in weapons such as the naginata, a long polearm with a curved blade, and the bow. In times of war, when men were absent or battles reached the home, women defended their families and lands with courage. Some fought beside their husbands, others alone, their skill equal to any samurai. One famous figure was Tomo Guzan, who lived in the late 12th century during the Genpei War. Chronicles describe her as strong, skilled with bow and sword, fearless. In battle, she fought alongside Minamoto no Yashinaka, her lord and husband, and led men into combat with unmatched bravery. Though her exact deeds are wrapped in legend, her presence endures as a symbol of the strength women carried even in the age of samurai. Imagine Tomo on the battlefield. Her armor gleams in sunlight, her naginata slicing through the air with precision. Her horse charges across the field, banners fluttering behind her. She moves with discipline, her gaze steady, her spirit unshaken. Around her, warriors fight and fall, but she remains unbroken, carrying both duty and defiance. Temples also became places for women. Some chose monastic life, donning robes, shaving their heads, living in quiet devotion. They tended to gardens, copied sutras, and sought enlightenment in silence. For them, freedom was not found in courts or battles, but in detachment from the world. In the steady rhythm of prayer, the roles of women were many, noble ladies shaping culture, peasant women sustaining life, warriors defending homes, nuns seeking spirit. Each role was different, but all carried the same thread of quiet endurance. They lived in shadows, but their strength was not diminished. It was woven into the very fabric of medieval Japan. As you drift into calm, imagine the women of that age. A lady writing poetry by lamplight, a mother stirring rice in a village hearth, a warrior gripping her naginata in the heat of battle, a nun kneeling before a temple altar. Their voices may be softer in history, but their presence remains, steady as the mountains, fleeting as blossoms, eternal as memory. Every civilization faces moments of trial, when the quiet rhythm of daily life is broken by forces from beyond. For medieval Japan, such a moment came not once, but twice, in the form of vast fleets sailing from across the sea, the armies of the Mongols, who had conquered half the known world and now turned their gaze to the islands of the rising sun. Yet what followed was not only war, but legend, the story of storms so fierce they seemed like the hand of heaven itself, protecting Japan in its hour of need. That in the late 13th century, Kublai Khan, ruler of the Mongol Empire, sought to add Japan to his dominion. Letters were sent to the shogunate, demanding submission, tribute, recognition of his power. The Japanese refused. They bowed to no foreign lord, their loyalty given only to their emperor in Kyoto and the shogun in Kamakura. The refusal angered Kublai, and in 1274 he sent his fleets across the sea. Imagine the horizon as villagers looked out from Kyushu, the southern island. The sea is dotted with sails, hundreds of ships approaching like dark birds against the sky. The Mongols came with soldiers from many lands. Mongols, Chinese, Koreans, carrying bows, spears, and explosives that thundered with unfamiliar sound. For the first time, the samurai faced an enemy unlike any they had known. The battle was fierce. Samurai rode into the waves, their swords flashing, their armor glinting, calling out their names as they fought. Yet the Mongols fought differently, not in single combat, but in tight ranks, shields raised, arrows loosed in volleys. Explosive bombs burst with fire and sound, startling men and horses alike. The defenders strained, the invaders pressed, and for a moment, it seemed the land might fall, but then came the storm. Winds rose, rain poured, waves crashed. The Mongol fleet, unprepared for the fury of the sea, broke apart. Ships collided, timbers shattered, men were thrown into the waves. The survivors fled, their invasion undone not by sword alone, but by water, wind, and storm. Kublai Khan was not finished. In 1281, he sent an even greater force, a fleet of thousands of ships, carrying hundreds of thousands of men, one of the largest invasions ever attempted in history. Again, the seas filled with sails, the horizon dark with warriors. The Japanese braced themselves, building defenses along the coast, preparing for a battle greater than any before. Fighting raged for weeks. Samurai hurled back assaults, villages burned, the air filled with the clash of steel and the cries of battle. Yet once more, the storm came. Winds rose suddenly, fierce and unrelenting. Waves towered, lightning split the sky. The Mongol fleet, vast as it was, could not endure. Ships splintered, men were swallowed by the sea, survivors scattered. The storm destroyed the invasion, leaving Japan untouched. These storms became legend, known as the kamikaze, the divine winds. To the people of Japan, they were not accidents of weather, but the hand of heaven, the spirit of the land itself rising to protect them. Priests gave thanks, poets sang of the winds. The story carried into the heart of the nation. The Mongols, who had conquered so many lands, could not conquer Japan, for the sea itself had risen in its defense. Imagine standing on the shore after the storm. The beach is littered with broken ships, fragments of wood and ropes scattered across the sand. Survivors wander, stunned, while villagers watch in silence. The wind still carries the smell of salt and fire. The sea still roars with power. And, above it all, the sky clears, the sun returning, as if to say that the storm has passed and the land endures. The Mongol invasions left scars, villages burned, lives lost, fields destroyed. Yet they also left a sense of destiny, of protection, of identity. Japan was not merely another land. It was a place guarded by its gods, by its winds, by the spirit of its people. The story of the kamikaze became more than history. It became myth, a reminder that even in moments of great trial, the land itself could rise to protect its own. You drift into rest. Imagine the sound of wind through pines, the crash of waves against shore, the glow of lanterns lit in thanks after the storm. Imagine the samurai kneeling in temples, offering prayers for survival, the villagers bowing before altars, whispering gratitude to the divine winds. The storms are gone, but their whisper remains, carried still in the breeze of every Japanese shore. In most lands, power was carried by crowns, by thrones, by kings seated in palaces of stone. But in medieval Japan, power flowed differently, quietly, like an underground river. The emperor remained in Kyoto, his presence a symbol of divine descent, his palace filled with poetry, ceremony, and the rituals of tradition. Yet the real weight of rule shifted elsewhere, to the shogun, the military leader, whose authority was forged not in silk and scrolls, but in sword and loyalty. The rise of the shogunate began in the late 12th century, when the Minamoto clan defeated the Taira in the Genpei War. From that victory, Minamoto no Yoritomo emerged as Japan's first shogun, establishing the Kamakura shogunate. It was a new order, one where the emperor remained as a figure of reverence, yet the reins of government passed into the hands of warriors. The shogunate was not a palace alone, but a network of samurai lords, each bound by oath, each sustaining a delicate web of loyalty. Imagine Kamakura at dawn, the seat of the first shogunate. Wooden halls rise against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. Samurai gather in courtyards, armor clinking softly, banners fluttering in the morning breeze. Messengers ride in from provinces, carrying scrolls of tax records, lists of harvests, reports of disputes. Within the shogun's hall, officials bow low, presenting petitions, decisions to be made not by an emperor of ceremony, but by a warrior of discipline. The air is calm, yet beneath it hums the quiet power of a new order. The emperor still mattered. He performed sacred rites, his lineage traced to the sun goddess Amaterasu. He was the light of tradition, the heart of identity. Yet his role was ceremonial, his hand no longer guiding policy or armies. Instead, he became like a lamp glowing in the distance, steady but faint, while the shogun carried the weight of governance. The dual structure of emperor and shogun gave medieval Japan its unique balance, reverence for the divine, but rule by the practical. The shogunate depended on the loyalty of daimyo, the lords who governed provinces. They collected taxes, maintained order, and commanded samurai. Beneath them were farmers, artisans, and merchants, whose labor sustained all. At the top, the shogun held the threads, a weaver of duty and discipline. It was not a hierarchy carved into stone, but a living web, shifting with alliances, strained by rivalries, yet bound by honor. Justice under the shogunate was stern but ordered. Disputes were settled by samurai officials, records kept in wooden tablets and scrolls. Taxes were gathered in rice, measured in granaries. Roads were watched, temples respected, villages bound into the system of governance. It was not an empire of conquest, but of maintenance, of ensuring that the flow of rice, loyalty, and silence continued. Imagine a farmer in a distant village carrying his share of rice to the granary. He bows before the samurai official, places his sacks on the wooden floor, and steps back in silence. He knows this rice will flow upward, to the daimyo, to the shogun, to sustain the system. His own family will eat what remains. There is no crown above him, no royal decree, but the presence of the shogunate is felt even here, in the humble offering of grain. The shogunate's power was not loud, but steady. It endured invasions, such as the Mongols who came with fleets across the sea. Twice, storms destroyed those fleets. The kamikaze, the divine winds, celebrated as signs of protection. Yet the shogunate's endurance lay less in storms and more in its discipline. In the bonds of loyalty it wove across the land. As evening falls in Kamakura, lanterns glow along wooden corridors. The shogun sits in council, surrounded by advisors. Their voices low, their words measured. Outside, samurai stand guard, their swords sheathed but ready. The sound of the temple bell carries across the valley, mingling with the sea breeze. Power here is not displayed in gold or stone, but in silence, in shadow, in the presence of warriors who bow their heads, ready to serve. The rise of the shogunate reminds us that power can be quiet. It need not shout to endure. It can live in the discipline of samurai, in the order of provinces, in the steady flow of rice from field to granary. It was a system not of spectacle, but of structure, not of crowns, but of shadows. As you drift into rest, imagine walking through the halls of Kamakura, wooden floors smooth beneath your feet, banners swaying in the breeze, lanterns glowing in silence. Imagine the shogun seated calmly, his presence steady, his authority carried not in shouts but in stillness. This is the power of medieval Japan, the shogunate, a rule of shadows and discipline. In medieval Japan, beauty was not found only in temples or armor, nor only in great halls or festivals. It was found in the smallest things, in the curl of moss on stone, in the fall of a single cherry blossom petal, in the way a lantern's flame flickered in the wind. The people of this age understood something subtle, that beauty is fragile, that nothing lasts, that impermanence is not sorrow, but truth. This quiet philosophy came to be known later as wabi-sabi, the appreciation of imperfection, of transience, of the fleeting nature of all things. Gardens became the living stage for this philosophy. Zen monks shaped them with stone, sand, and pine, creating landscapes that were not mere decoration, but meditations made visible. Rocks stood as mountains, sand was raked into flowing rivers, moss covered earth like time's gentle hand. These gardens were not filled with flowers, but with silence. To walk among them was to step into a poem without words, to feel the flow of time in the curve of stone, to see eternity in impermanence. Imagine a monk at dawn, raking the sand of a temple garden. Each line is careful, flowing like waves. He pauses, looks at the pattern, then erases it with a sweep, beginning again. The act is not to finish, but to practice, to embody the truth that nothing endures, that each moment is complete even as it passes. The garden is never final, always changing, like the seasons themselves. Poetry, too, reflected this sensibility. Short forms such as waka and later haiku carried the weight of impermanence in only a few lines. A poem about a frog leaping into a pond, about the moon reflected in rice fields, about the sound of wind through bamboo. Each small, each fleeting, yet eternal in its simplicity. To write poetry in medieval Japan was not to shout, but to whisper, not to capture eternity, but to capture a single moment as it passed. Cherry blossoms became the most enduring symbol of this truth. Each spring, their branches filled with soft pink flowers, glowing like clouds against the sky. For a week, the world was transformed, every breeze carrying petals through the air, every river reflecting their fleeting beauty. And then just as suddenly, they were gone, the branches bare again, the blossoms fallen to the earth. To sit beneath them was to be reminded of life itself, brief, fragile, beautiful. Samurai, monks, Villagers alike saw in the cherry blossom a mirror of their own lives, bright for a moment, fading swiftly, yet meaningful in their transience. Tea, too, became part of this aesthetic. The tea ceremony, with its careful movements and plain pottery, was not about luxury, but about humility. A simple bowl, rough in texture, was more valued than one of perfect polish, for it carried the marks of human hands, the imperfections that made it unique. To sip tea in silence, to bow to one another, to cherish the moment of warmth. This was another way of honoring impermanence, of finding beauty in simplicity. Imagine an evening in Kyoto. A small group gathers in a tea house. The host moves slowly, each gesture deliberate, pouring hot water into a clay bowl, whisking green tea into foam. The guests watch in silence, sipping with reverence. Outside, the moon glows through paper screens, and the sound of wind brushes against bamboo. Nothing extraordinary happens, and yet everything feels complete. The moment is fleeting, yet perfect in its passing. The aesthetic of wabi-sabi shaped more than gardens and poetry. It shaped the spirit of the age. It taught people to accept life as it was, to find meaning not in permanence, but in change. A cracked bowl was not broken, but beautiful. A fallen blossom was not loss, but truth. A weathered temple pillar, worn smooth by time, carried dignity greater than newness. As you rest tonight, imagine sitting in a garden of stone and moss, lanterns glowing softly, cherry blossoms drifting on the breeze. Imagine a monk raking sand, a poet writing by lamplight, a family sipping tea in silence. The beauty is fragile, fleeting, impermanent, and that is why it endures. Every age of warriors and rulers rests upon the shoulders of those who work the soil, shape tools, and carry goods across markets. In medieval Japan, beneath the power of shoguns and samurai, life pulsed in villages where farmers bent over rice fields. Artisans shaped beauty from wood and clay, and merchants carried whispers of trade along dusty roads. Their names are forgotten, their voices silent, yet their hands sustain the entire world of medieval Japan. Imagine a village at dawn. Mist rising from rice paddies. Wooden houses with thatched roofs stand in clusters, smoke curling gently from their hearths. Farmers wade into shallow water, their feet sinking into mud as they plant seedlings in straight rows. The air is filled with the croak of frogs, the flutter of cranes, the soft hum of insects. Children run along narrow paths between paddies, carrying baskets of seedlings, their laughter mingling with the sound of water trickling through canals. Rice was life. It was more than food. It was wealth, tax, and ritual. Farmers worked long hours in the fields, guided by the rhythm of the seasons. The planting festival in spring, the harvest celebration in autumn, these were not only moments of labor, but of community. Rice sustained families, but it also sustained the samurai above them, for taxes were often paid in rice, collected in granaries that fed both warriors and lords. To grow rice was to serve not only the family, but the land, the village, the shogunate itself. Artisans filled the villages with craft. The carpenter shaping beams for a temple roof, the potter turning clay into bowls for daily meals, the weaver spinning thread into cloth. Their work carried both beauty and necessity, linking survival with artistry. A farmer's bowl was not crude, but painted with care. A child's toy, carved from wood, carried imagination in its form. Even the tools of work, sickles, hoes, baskets, were shaped with balance and grace. In every corner of the village, art was woven into life. Merchants walked the narrow paths, carrying goods from one settlement to another. Their carts creaked with bundles of cloth, jars of oil, baskets of fish dried in salt. They were often low in status, seen as necessary but not honored, for they did not create, but moved what others had made. Yet without them, goods would not flow, and the silent web of exchange would falter. Imagine a merchant arriving at a village square, unrolling cloths dyed deep blue, setting down jars that smelled of sesame oil, offering trinkets of iron and bronze. The villagers gather, eyes bright with curiosity, children tugging at sleeves to see the treasures of the road. The structure of life was clear. At the top stood the samurai, collecting taxes and enforcing order. Beneath them, the farmers bore the heaviest burden, working fields that were both theirs and not theirs, tied to the land by duty. Artisans gave shape to the tools and ornaments of life. Merchants carried them outward, monks gave spiritual guidance, and peasants provided the foundation. Society was layered, but also interwoven, each part depending on the other. Despite hardship, there was joy. Festivals lit the year, lanterns glowing in the night, drums echoing through fields, dancers in masks telling ancient stories. Villagers shared sake brewed from rice. Children carried paper lanterns. Elders told tales beneath the stars. Music, laughter, and ritual gave color to lives otherwise filled with toil. Even in a world of shadows, light was found in community, in rhythm, in the turning of the seasons. Imagine evening in such a village. The rice fields are quiet, water reflecting the fading sun. Farmers return home, shoulders heavy, but smiles on their faces as children run to greet them. A pot of rice simmers over the hearth, its steam filling the house with warmth. Outside, neighbors gather, speaking softly, sharing news of weather and crops. A flute plays in the distance, its notes rising like mist. The samurai may rule, but in this moment, life belongs to the villagers. Humble, enduring, beautiful in its simplicity, the villages of medieval Japan remind us that history is not only shaped by warriors and temples, but by those who lived in silence, whose hands planted, shaped, and carried the world forward. They are the forgotten majority, the quiet heart of civilization, whose whispers still rise from the rice fields beneath the shadows of time. As you drift into rest, imagine walking barefoot through the fields, the water cool against your skin, the cranes lifting into the sky, the laughter of children carrying across the paddies. Imagine the glow of hearths, the sound of drums at festivals, the rhythm of life flowing steadily like water through canals. This is the world of medieval Japan's villages, humble, enduring, and eternal. In the quiet valleys of medieval Japan, there walked figures who carried not only swords, but also the weight of loyalty, discipline, and silence. These were the samurai, warriors whose presence defined the age, whose lives balanced between duty and death, whose shadows stretched across villages, temples, and battlefields alike. The samurai did not emerge suddenly. They were born slowly, as landowners and warriors rose during the late Heian period, when emperors in Kyoto began to lose control of distant provinces. Families with land hired armed men to defend their rice, their villages, their honor. Over generations, these warriors became a class of their own, bound by loyalty to their lords, carrying weapons as marks of identity. By the time of the Kamakura shogunate, the samurai were no longer simply hired guards. They were the backbone of military government, the very pillars of power. Imagine a samurai at dawn. His armor is not yet the brilliant lacquer of later centuries, but plates of iron bound with cords, sturdy and practical. His bow is long, taller than himself, able to send arrows across wide fields. At his side hangs a curved sword, not yet the perfected katana, but the ancestor of it, sharp, steady, alive with the skill of the smith. He steps into the courtyard, breath visible in the cool air. He bows toward his lord's home, toward the rising sun, and then begins his practice. Discipline defined the samurai. To wield a sword was not simply to fight, but to embody control of body, of mind, of spirit. Every movement was measured, every strike carried intention. Training was endless. Drawing the bow until the muscles ached, repeating sword strokes until they became as natural as breath, riding horses across fields until balance and motion were one. To be a samurai was to carry war within silence, to live always prepared, yet often waiting. Loyalty, too, was the core of their life. The samurai served their daimyo, the lords who ruled provinces under the shogun's command. To betray that loyalty was worse than death. Honor was more valuable than life, shame heavier than any blade. This sense of duty created a shadow across their lives. Each decision measured not only by personal need, but by the bond of service, by the code that placed loyalty above self. The sword itself became a symbol, not merely a weapon. Forged by masters who treated the act of smithing as ritual, each blade was folded and hammered until it was both strong and flexible. To hold a sword was to hold a spirit. The samurai cared for their weapons as if they were living companions, polishing them, wrapping them, carrying them with reverence. When drawn, the sword was not only steel, but the embodiment of their honor. And yet, for all their discipline, the samurai lived in shadows. Their world was not constant battle. Wars came, but years of waiting stretched between them. In those years, they trained, they served their lords, they walked the narrow line between farmer and warrior, between life and death. The sword at their side was both a tool and a reminder that at any moment, the shadow of death could fall, and they must be ready to meet it with calm. Imagine a quiet night in Kamakura. A samurai kneels in a courtyard, sword laid before him. The moon glows above, clouds drifting like ghosts. He breathes slowly, his hands resting on his knees. He thinks not of glory, but of duty, of family, of the impermanence of all things. The cicadas sing in the darkness, the temple bell tolls faintly in the distance, and he sits still, a shadow within shadows, waiting for whatever dawn may bring. The rise of the samurai shaped medieval Japan not through conquest alone, but through presence, through the discipline of their training, the weight of their loyalty, the quiet power of their silence. They became not only warriors, but symbols of duty, of impermanence, of the balance between life and death. As you drift into rest, imagine their shadows, samurai walking among rice fields, their armor glinting softly in sunlight, samurai kneeling in temples, their swords resting quietly beside them, samurai riding through misty valleys, silent as the wind. The samurai remind us that strength is not always noise. Sometimes it is silence carried like steel, discipline worn like armor, shadow cast like a prayer. If the samurai were the shadow of medieval Japan, then temples were its quiet breath. Across the valleys and mountains, wooden halls rose from the earth like extensions of the forest itself. Their roofs curved like the wings of birds, their pillars carved from cedar and pine, their gardens shaped with stone and sand into patterns of eternity. Here, monks lived in silence, their lives given to prayer, meditation, and the steady rhythm of ritual. The arrival of Zen Buddhism from China shaped much of this spiritual world. It was a faith not of words alone, but of practice, of sitting still, of breathing deeply, of seeking enlightenment not in books but in silence. The monks of medieval Japan embraced this discipline, rising before dawn, chanting sutras as the first light touched the mountains. Their temples were not monuments to grandeur, but spaces of simplicity, built to hold silence like a vessel. Imagine a temple at dawn. The bell tolls, its deep voice rolling across valleys. Mist drifts through tall pines, settling on moss that glows faintly green. Monks step quietly across wooden floors, their robes rustling like whispers. In the meditation hall, they sit cross-legged, motionless, their eyes lowered. Outside, the garden waits, stones carefully placed to represent mountains, raked sand flowing like rivers, a single pine tree bending with age and dignity. The temple breathes in harmony with the world. The samurai, too, came to these places. Though trained in war, many sought balance in Zen teachings. They found in silence the same discipline they found in swordsmanship, the focus of breath, the stillness before motion, the acceptance of impermanence. For a warrior who might die in battle, the teaching that all things pass, cherry blossoms falling, rivers flowing, lives ending, carried deep meaning. Zen was not escape from life, but a way to meet it with clarity. Temples also served the community. Farmers brought offerings of rice. Merchants lit lanterns before altars. Families prayed for health and protection. Festivals filled temple grounds with color and sound. Dancers in masks performing ancient plays, drums echoing through the night, lanterns floating into the sky. Even in moments of celebration, the temple was a center, a reminder that life was more than toil or war, that spirit mattered as much as body. The architecture of these temples reflected the heart of their faith. Wooden halls, airy and open, invited nature inward. Sliding doors opened to gardens, so that the line between inside and outside blurred. Light filtered through paper screens, soft and gentle, never harsh. The temple was not a fortress against the world, but a harmony with it. To enter was to step into stillness, to remember that even in a world of warriors and storms, peace could be shaped like a garden, tended like a flame. Imagine evening at such a temple. The sun sets behind mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and violet. Monks gather once more, chanting sutras that rise like smoke into the darkening air. Lanterns are lit, glowing softly in rows. The garden, raked and perfect, shines in moonlight. The temple bell tolls again, slower now, a sound that seems to echo not only through the valley but through time itself. The temples of medieval Japan were more than buildings. They were living presences, places where silence had form, where discipline became beauty, where spirit and nature met. To walk their halls was to walk into a rhythm older than words, deeper than history. A rhythm that still hums in the forests and mountains of Japan today. As you close your eyes, imagine sitting in such a hall. The air is cool, the wood beneath you smooth, the sound of your breath steady. Outside, the pines whisper in the wind, the river flows gently, the bell tolls far away. This is the heart of medieval Japan, not the clash of swords, but the silence of temples among the pines. The story begins with the fading of one world and the rising of another. In the centuries before, Japan was shaped by the courtly elegance of the Heian period, a time of poetry written in flowing brushstrokes, of nobles in layered robes, of palaces shimmering with golden screens. Yet even as the aristocrats composed verses under the moon, the balance of power shifted. Far from the capital, warriors rose, men who carried bows and swords, who lived not for poetry but for survival, for loyalty, for duty. By the late 12th century, Japan entered its medieval age. The courtly world of Kyoto remained, with its lanterns and palaces, but another authority emerged, the shogunate, ruled not by emperors but by military leaders. The Genpei War, a clash between the powerful Taira and Minamoto clans, reshaped the land. From the ashes of this conflict rose the Kamakura shogunate, the first warrior government, where power rested not in silk-robed courtiers, but in armored men bound by loyalty and honor. Imagine the dawn in Kamakura. The sea mist drifts over pine-covered hills. Wooden houses line narrow paths. A temple bell tolls, its sound echoing through valleys. Samurai walk quietly, their swords at their sides, their armor simple but strong. Farmers bend over fields of rice, their bodies mirrored in shallow water. Monks chant in the distance, their voices blending with the sea wind. The land is calm, but beneath it flows the strength of change. This was not a world of kings and crowns, but of layered loyalties. The emperor remained in Kyoto, but his power was symbolic. Real authority flowed through the shogun, and beneath him, the samurai lords who governed provinces, collected taxes, and kept order. At the bottom were farmers, artisans, and merchants, the silent majority who sustained the world with their labor. Life was ordered, yet fragile, bound by duty and shadow. And as the sun rose over Kamakura, the medieval age of Japan unfolded, an age of silent temples, samurai shadows, and a beauty both fragile and enduring. History often remembers rulers and warriors, yet civilizations are sustained by the hands of artisans, the quiet workers who shape clay, weave thread, carve wood, and forge beauty from the simplest of materials. In medieval Japan, artisans carried a dignity not always recognized by rank, but always present in their craft. Their bowls were used in every meal, their cloth worn on every back, their wood shaped into every temple and castle beam. They lived in the margins of chronicles, but their work filled every space of daily life. The potters were among the most vital. With earth, fire, and water, they created vessels that carried rice, soup, tea, and sake. Some made simple jars for farmers, sturdy and plain, their clay rough but reliable. Others shaped bowls of elegance, their glazes flowing like rivers, their imperfections treasured as signs of humanity. These bowls later became central to the tea ceremony, where even the humblest vessel carried spiritual meaning. Imagine a potter at his wheel. His hands are covered in clay, his fingers steady as they guide the spinning form. Slowly, a bowl emerges, curved, balanced, alive. He lifts it carefully, sets it aside to dry, then later places it into the kiln. Fire roars, the clay glows red, glaze melts into patterns of chance. When cooled, the bowl carries both intention and accident, discipline and impermanence. It is not only a vessel, but a lesson in life itself. Weavers shaped thread into fabric, turning fibers of silk, hemp, and cotton into garments. Their looms filled homes with rhythm, the clack of wood and the hum of thread. In noble courts, silks were dyed in colors of deep crimson, indigo, and saffron, patterns of blossoms and cranes woven with care. In villages, garments were simpler, patched and repatched, yet each stitch carried love, each cloth warmth. The art of weaving was both survival and expression, a way of covering the body and shaping identity. Picture a woman at her loom in a village. Light filters through the paper, screens, falling upon the threads stretched before her. Her shuttle slides back and forth, the cloth slowly growing, row upon row. Children play nearby, their laughter blending with the steady sound of weaving. When the cloth is finished, she folds it carefully, knowing it will clothe her family, protect them from wind and cold. Her work is humble, but her threads carry the continuity of life. Carpenters built the structures of medieval Japan. With saw and chisel, they shaped temples, castles, bridges, and homes. Their woodwork carried not only strength but harmony. Beams fit together without nails, held by joints so precise they seemed to breathe as one. Roofs curved like wings, doors slid silently, verandas opened to gardens. To enter a building crafted by their hands was to feel balance between wood, stone, and air. Imagine carpenters constructing a temple. Logs are carried from the mountains, stripped and cut. The master carpenter studies each beam, choosing how it will fit. His apprentices carve, measure, and sand, their tools sharp, their hands steady. Slowly, the structure rises, pillars standing like trees, beams stretching across, roof tiles placed one by one. When finished, the hall does not feel built, but grown, as if the forest itself had chosen to stand here. Other artisans filled villages and towns, blacksmiths forging sickles and swords, lacquerers polishing wooden bowls until they shone, painters decorating screens with cranes and mountains, toy makers carving small horses for children. Each craft was both labor and art, shaped by necessity, yet filled with beauty. In markets, the work of artisans glowed with life. Stalls displayed bowls painted with cranes, fabrics dyed deep blue, tools polished smooth, toys carved from cedar. Farmers and merchants examined them, bartered rice and coins, carried them home to be used and treasured. These objects were not luxuries but companions, present in meals, in rituals, in play. The hands of artisans touched every corner of life, silently but surely. Spiritually, craft was more than survival. It was a path of devotion. The potter's bowl, the weaver's cloth, the carpenter's beam, all reflected impermanence, discipline, and harmony with nature. A cracked pot was not discarded but repaired, its scars filled with gold in the art of kintsugi, making imperfection into beauty. A worn cloth carried the warmth of years, a polished beam the touch of countless hands. Artisans taught, without words, that beauty lies not in perfection, but in endurance, in care, in the marks of time. As night falls, imagine an artisan's workshop. A potter sets aside bowls cooled from the kiln, their glaze shining softly in lamplight. A weaver folds freshly woven cloth, her loom silent at last. A carpenter smooths the final beam of a gate, his chisel resting beside him. Outside, the village glows with lanterns, families gather around meals, and the work of artisans fills every space. The bowls, the garments, the homes. Their names may be forgotten, but their touch endures. The artisans of medieval Japan remind us that history is not only battles and rulers, but hands that shaped beauty quietly, patiently, humbly. Their work teaches us that every vessel, every thread, every beam carries a story, a spirit, a lesson in impermanence. As you rest tonight, imagine holding a clay bowl, feeling its texture beneath your hands, sipping tea in silence. Imagine wrapping yourself in a cloth woven with care, stepping into a hall built of wood and light. These are the gifts of artisans, humble, enduring, eternal. We have walked through the quiet halls of temples, sat beneath the blossoms of spring, listened to the toll of bells across misty valleys, and stood within the shadows of castles rising from stone. We have watched samurai draw their swords with calm discipline, monks rake gardens in silence, peasants bow before shrines in rice fields, artisans shape bowls and beams with patient hands. We have seen joy in lantern festivals, sorrow in battlefields, resilience in villages, and impermanence written across every blossom, every flame, every life. The story of medieval Japan is not one of endless war alone, nor only of poetry and peace. It is both, a blending of shadow and light, of silence and sound, of impermanence and endurance. It teaches that beauty does not require permanence, that strength can live in stillness, that even in times of chaos, people seek harmony. The samurai, with their swords polished like mirrors, remind us that discipline is not only for battle, but for life itself. The monks, seated in meditation, teach that silence carries truths deeper than words. The peasants, bent in rice paddies, show that endurance is sacred, that survival itself is devotion. The artisans, shaping vessels and weaving cloth, reveal that imperfection can be beauty, that the marks of time are not flaws but blessings. Festivals and lanterns remind us that joy is fleeting and therefore precious. Castles and wars remind us that power is fragile and therefore human. Blossoms remind us that life is brief and therefore beautiful. As we close this journey, imagine all these images gathered together. The pine tree painted upon a no stage, the golden pavilion reflecting upon still water, the clang of armor, the hum of weaving, the glow of lanterns drifting upon rivers. Each is separate, yet together they form a single breath, a single moment, a single story of a land that lived in both shadow and silence. Medieval Japan whispers to us across centuries. It does not shout with monuments, but breathes with gardens, poems, and rituals. It reminds us that nothing lasts forever, and in that truth lies peace. As you drift into sleep, let the sound of temple bells echo softly in your mind. Let the image of cherry blossoms falling upon water carry you. Let the glow of lanterns guide you into rest. Shadows and silence surround you, not as emptiness, but as presence. This is the gift of medieval Japan, the beauty of impermanence, the harmony of shadow, the eternity of silence.